It's about time to get started with Drupal CMS and what's in it for privacy and data protection. Before I get started, a little bit about myself. I'm from an agency called Lake Drops. We are based in Germany, in the very south border to Switzerland. Nice place over there. I'm working out of my home office since 2007, exclusively on Drupal. I'm known for a couple of modules that I maintain, one of which is ECA, and the other one is Gin, which is the admin theme. I only became a co-maintainer of that about 6 months ago. I was or still am, the track lead for privacy and compliance in Drupal CMS, and I'm happy to walk you through on what we had to do, what was the task, and how we went about all of that. So the agenda for today is we are talking through the process, and I introduce you to the team because that wasn't just my work. That was a fairly big team with 9 people, with weekly meetings and stuff in between, and module maintainers on top of that as well. So after a summary and collecting some links, so everything you see on here is collected as a link summary, and you will find all the slides on that shortcut, golakedrops.com/privacy-atlanta-2025. There you can find them all, and that gives you access to all the links for further information as well. So feel free to take screenshots all through the presentation, but you can also download them and then review it locally. So I would like to get started with the question, does it really matter? And if I say, does it matter, what is it, right? So it's not just privacy or what else. I would like to go through 3 components that we identified and broke it down to. The first one being privacy in itself, which is a fundamental right for individuals in a lot of countries in the world. Maybe I could already say in most countries in the world. But then we also have data protection, which is about preventing real damage, and I go into that, what I mean by real damage, in a minute. And there is compliance with this, which is an obligation for businesses if they want to run websites. Most countries have their own legislation. In Europe, we have a common legislation which applies to 27 countries, so that sounds a bit easier. But don't get me wrong, each of those 27 countries have their own variation of what is known as GDPR as a European legislation, so it is still fragmented and slightly different in each of those countries. And what makes developing a product that complies with privacy legislation so difficult is the fact that the provider of the website, which is the company running a website, is very often not in the same country as the visitors of those websites. So the question remains, which legislation applies? Is it the one where the website is hosted, or is it the one where the visitor is actually looking at the content? There are some debates and there are no final answers for it, but we will hopefully get into the conclusion in a minute that that probably doesn't even matter to us when we build default configuration for Drupal CMS. So once again, a fundamental right is privacy. Now we very often, not as often anymore, but still, people saying, I have nothing to hide. So why should we bother about privacy? Well, I don't believe people who are saying that, but who am I telling them? You know, that's not my responsibility, and probably not even in my remit to be able to, that I should get so close to people to tell them that they should care. But what I do care is my own privacy, and as it is my fundamental right, I'm just sick to explain every single time why I insist that others respect my fundamental right. So that's why it matters. as well as real damage. You know, identity theft is something that's real. It happens every day. It happens a lot. And who experienced identity theft really knows what that means, and it can be very, very hard to get out of that mess, and it's really terrifying. And also think about 23andMe as an example. Their data breach is, I believe, more than 2 years old, but it still has massive impact on people who had their data stored with them. And if I'm not wrong, they just filed bankruptcy this week. And that means that data is now for sale. And there are lots of parties very, very interested in that data. And it's a legal obligation. And I think in countries where we all grew up, it is just a natural thing to comply with legal requirements. Sometimes it's under debate, but it is hopefully still something that we continue to do. But at the same time, that also tells us a story that all of what we are talking today most likely doesn't apply to the full extent to private websites or sports clubs or many others. So we need to keep the focus and understand to whom that really matters. I'm not saying that a private sports club doesn't have to have a privacy policy and should be careful with the data of their members, just the opposite. But there is a difference between the obligation for companies and the obligations for individuals. So, does it matter to us as a Drupal community? There is legislation in place, and while building a product, it's not the right time for us to discuss whether the legislation is a good one or a bad one. I'm not saying we should keep ourselves completely out of legal discussions, and we do have opinions and everything, but when we build a product, we have a task which is not there to say, well, I don't want to build the task, I just want to change that the legislation gets changed. No, the legislation is there. We want to provide products, and our end users, our customers, they have an expectation that they can use our product without actually breaking the law. And there is also the open web. Just going back for a sec, I would like to refer to that because Dries mentioned that at the end of his keynote yesterday. The open web needs Drupal. The open web needs us. And there is no open web without the respect for individuals' fundamental rights. I will provide the link to the open web discussion that goes on everywhere. And there is also, don't know how many people know that, there is a Drupal Open Web Manifesto, which is very clear about that the community and everything we do in terms of development and the products that we provide are there to respect individuals' rights, respect their choice of what they want to do with their data. So that's why this one is so important. However, that's all good. But it's not only complicated to get our head around all those existing legislations, it's also changing so rapidly, right? So that means not only do we have to provide a default setup out of the box, we also have to help site owners to stay up to date. So how should we actually go about all this in a meaningful way? Let's see what Heather Burns, she's a famous book author about privacy, has to say about that. And I think she just put it together in one sentence, which is so precise that I would like to read that one out. A user's privacy protection should never be contingent on the presence or the absence of a privacy regulation which has formalized those principles into law. So, with this in mind, it's not so much about what do we have to do, it's more about what do we want to do. That's how I understand this one sentence from Heather, and we get back to her later on with another more lengthy quote and more detail. But the good thing about this is I was encouraged by her writing because it means she's shouting out, and she was active in the Drupal community before as well, and was kind of frustrated because nobody picked it up. She must be very excited that we are doing that now in Drupal CMS, and not we. I was only the one who organized the task, but the leadership team, Dries, Pamela, and many others, they decided privacy is a must-have in Drupal CMS. And when I heard that, I just couldn't believe it, because in the past, we always had to argue why we want to be part of the party as well. So, a global product that is compliant. What a headache. But wait a minute. How should we do that really globally? There is only Europe and California, right? Only those have privacy laws. Yeah, that's what most people have in mind, but think again. This is a map, and there is a link as well. This is a fantastic resource. Almost all of them have some flavor of red, and the darker the red, the more strict and restrictive the regulations in those countries are. So I'm not saying that we are there yet. It's not all the countries respecting our privacy, but most countries are catching up. And the fun thing is, I've taken lots of interviews with individuals from all continents on the globe. That was South Africa was included, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, England, people from Europe, America, North and South, everywhere. And I was really surprised. Privacy got their attention, and most agency leaders told me, Drupal agency leaders, I have to say, told me that more and more of their corporate or governmental clients are pushing them to provide privacy compliant solutions. And even organizations in, for example, New Zealand, care about GDPR. This is what they have in mind. This is the blueprint for them, and they want to provide websites that comply with that, although there is no legal requirement for them to do so. I was really, really impressed about that. So the question is, should we build a GDPR version for Drupal CMS? Well, it's perceived as overreaching by many, right? Who does not hate cookie banners when they pop up, right? Well, more and more of us don't even see them anymore, because browsers came up with plugins that automatically make sure that they get clicked at the right place, so that, you know, the decision is taken by the browser and no longer by the user. So it's just meaningless, right? So therefore, it's not really solving a real problem. And the effect is that people get tired, you know? Even those who want to be careful, who want to spend attention to that topic, the way it has been implemented is so awful that people just turn around and want to walk away. But I have to emphasize, it's not the regulation that's wrong. If you look into it, and if you discuss with the people who actually came up with the proposals and who designed the actual law, the text that is in that regulation, that's actually made really, really well. What's wrong is the implementation of it. And in particular in Europe, GDPR was introduced in May 2018, so 7 years ago. You can't imagine how rich we made our lawyers all over Europe, because they gave legal advice to all the companies who, well, the law was introduced in May. Starting in March, companies started to panic because they suddenly realized, oh my goodness, there is a compliance coming up. Oh, there was notice time, or a period of 3 years to get ready. Everything happened in the last 2 months. And the lawyers were so happy. They can call for any hourly rate they could possibly imagine, and people paid that. And their advice was, put a cookie banner on there. If the user accepts that, you are fine. And that's why we have them. And this is so stupid. It's just not correct. That's not what's in the law, right? So if GDPR is wrong, what about CPPA? Well, it's pretty similar, it's just more beautiful, at least in California. So maybe we should come up with a Drupal CMS version, one for each country or region. Well, I wouldn't have ever proposed that to the leadership team because, you know, having one is a big task. Having 200 is just impossible. That will never happen. So let's go back to Heather on how she takes that, and maybe we can find something from her on how to get it right. And I would like to read that out again because it's really important, and she has spent a lot of time in getting the detail into something that is short enough to, again, read it out. And that's a quote. "One phrase you will never hear me use is GDPR compliant. And bear in mind, we are using GDPR as a placeholder here. That could also be called CPPPA. That the same thing applies there, or any other regulation out there in the world. So just use that as a placeholder. So why is she never using GDPR compliant? Because there is no such thing. GDPR compliant, it's not possible. Why is that? GDPR is about systems, processes, and procedures, right? It's not a status. She calls it a journey. It's not a destination. That journey, for what it's worth, should be taken from the positive view of user protection and not the negative view of compliance as a regulatory threat. I find that an interesting observation. Like, you know, how you position yourself, why are you going to do that? It's to satisfy your users' requirements and not the law in the first place. So don't think in terms of becoming GDPR compliant, think instead of how to work towards a healthy regard for user privacy, using GDPR as your roadmap every day. Again, it's a journey, it's not a destination. And then last but not least, and I had a laugh out of that one, while you are on that journey, remember to cast a very suspicious eye on any individual or service provider who is claiming that they can make you compliant. Nobody can do that other than yourself and your team. It is something you have to pay attention day in and day out. So, with that in mind, what does that mean for Drupal CMS? Now, our objective was to provide default setup for the main target audience, which is marketeers, that allows them to become compliant with regulation. Well, with all that background that I just laid out, this is quite challenging. And there are conflicting interests, right? The marketeers, our main audience, they don't care. Why? Because they don't have to. They have to market their own products. Maybe their company should care, but probably they don't know how. And then on the other end, users have fundamental rights and they don't want to be bothered. Now, how do we bring all of that under one head and still make sure that we can satisfy everybody? Because, you know, we want people to be happy when they are using Drupal. So that's a challenge, and I'm going to give you some insights on how we went about it at all. So we broke it down into 3 blocks in the first place. There is consent management, then there is data protection. So consent management is something that happens with the user in the front end, in the browser. Data protection is more something like server-side, because this is where data lives for a longer period of time in most cases. But then there is also ongoing audits. Remember, it's a journey, it's not a destination. So let's go into the first one, which is consent management. And please note, I'm not talking about cookies. I'm talking about consent management. People have cookies in mind and they hate cookie banners for a good reason. But consent management is so much more, right? It's about storing data in the browser of the user. It could be cookies, yes, but you still have a problem without using any cookie, but using local storage instead. That's equally wrong. without the consent of the user. I'm now not quite sure, I'm pretty sure in Europe you are not allowed to store anything in the local storage of the user's browser without their consent. Nothing, right? So it's about cookies and local storage. It's about storing data on the server about the user. It's transferring data to third parties. It's about profiling, and it's about selling their data. All of that is only allowed with prior user consent, and asking for user consent is only valid if it's been done in an open environment where you ask the user for a decision where they really know what they are deciding about. So you have to tell them that you are about to store data, why you are doing it, and what's the purpose of all that, and how you are actually processing the data. So it's not about cookies, we mentioned that already. And the question is, how many sites do really require consent management? Right? We come from a point where we say everybody has a cookie banner. How many of them really need that? My estimate is about 1%. Well, maybe 5. Just not to get in a discussion about that, but that's at most 5%. Why is that? Because look around. Most sites don't use cookies anyway. Why do they have a cookie banner? But how many of those who need consent management are implementing it correctly? Unfortunately, almost none. If you look at the screenshot of a news outlet in Germany, this is what you find very often. It's more like a paywall. That's not consent management. You know, they want to prevent the user from consuming the content until they provide them the right to sell the data, because that's how they monetize their work. That's not consent management, and that's not caring about privacy. Okay, so how do we do it instead? Is there a way that we can get it right? Can we provide a product which just satisfies all of that without going that traditional route where everybody is just looking after themselves and not after others? At least we tried. And our first step was doing some research on what's available on Drupal.org, and we found almost 50 modules that actually deal with some sort of consent management. But most of them only covered part of it, and others had different issues that just ruled them out for being part of Drupal CMS. So what we did was, first of all, I was really surprised that there are so many. So what we did was building that spreadsheet and coming up with a list of criteria on how we want to go through the selection process. That was about the maintenance status of the modules. That was about Drupal 11 compatibility. That was about external libraries, if they use any. They need to be open source, of course, because we can't create Drupal CMS as an open source product and rely on a non-open source third-party component. Then if there is a third party involved, it cannot be based on a paid service contract. And we can't even go as far as requiring user to open an account with a third party before they can use Drupal CMS. That's just a no-go. So when applying all those criteria, we ended up with a short list of 3 potential candidates, and that short list fell apart far too quickly. It was so frustrating. Let's go through the 3 top modules. Cookies is the short name, and the cookies consent management was, or is still, the long name of that module. And it turned out that it only needs a external library, JavaScript, hosted on GitHub. It was minimized JavaScript, and it turned out it was very popular, but not open source. The maintainer of that library is a Drupal guy based in north of Germany, But he was kind of out of Drupal business, and we tried everything. We couldn't reach out to him asking if we can make it, or he can make it open source. I found somebody else who knew a bit about the history of the module, and he said the module or the library was developed on behalf of a client, and that client did never agree to actually make it open source. They agreed to publish it, but not with an open source license. So that was ruled out. Going into EU cookie compliance module, I personally had the first issue with the name of that module, because if I provide a global product and there is EU in the name, the largest part of the world would just react like, okay, they are providing a European product. Where is the flavor that applies to me? That doesn't really work. But even worse, we spoke to the maintainers, 2 big companies, 2 larger Drupal agencies, and they are still available to provide resources to maintain modules, but they didn't feel quite so happy with that particular module. They said, we started in the early days of GDPR. We really didn't have a plan. We just started to fix a problem, and it just grew out of our hands. So we have the feeling if it becomes more relevant, we need to rewrite that module first. Now, our problem was we didn't have time. It was October by that time, and we knew January 15 is release date, and sometime late November was quite kind of feature freeze, so we had to find something that did not have to be rewritten first. And then there was the GDPR module, also name not really usable. But it also turned out it doesn't come with consent management. It has some interesting bits and pieces with regard to data protection, but not for our first phase, so that didn't work either. So we were really frustrated, and it looked like we may well fail and not be able to deliver what we were supposed to deliver for CMS 1.0. And then we went really lucky. It was one of those meetings on the phone, everybody in a Zoom call, and one of my colleagues from a different agency, Toyo in Constance, he mentioned that they use Claro. And I said, yeah, I heard of that, and I saw that on your customers' websites, but isn't that a paid service? And he said, yeah, we are using it with a paid service, but the library itself is completely free. It's BSD licensed. And I said, that sounds interesting. So we have taken that module off our shortlist. It was in the research, but because of the paid services, we just ignored it and said we can't use that. So I said, okay, let's have another look. And it appears that we found a hidden champion. Feedback is so great. We looked into it. It is amazing. It's fantastic. And it really is open source. It's BSD licensed, and it ticks off all the boxes that we had in terms of requirements, modern architecture, maintainability, who is behind it. Everything was just fantastic. There was one thing that was really, really bad. Now in Drupal, we have Claro with C and we have Claro with K. This is kind of an issue, but I think we can live with that. And then something really exceptional happened. It's amazing. And it's another example why I'm so proud to be part of the Drupal community. Because we found Claro, we have spoken to all the maintainers of all the other modules, and we had to tell them now, look, it won't be yours, it will be Claro, sorry for wasting your time, and so on and so forth. And you know what happened? All those maintainers said, you know what, this is a great idea. We look into it, we love it, and we want to join forces. So now instead of having a mess of different modules where every current and future Drupal site owner is having the same struggle in finding out which one is the best, they all come together and agree that we go all behind Claro, we maintain it together, and for those like the EU cookie compliance module, they have 100,000, in the meantime even more than that, installations, active installations. They said, we don't want to rewrite it. We can see that there is end of life at some point because it just outgrows itself. We want to go over to Claro, so we offer a migration path for all existing sites. So if they want to, they don't just have to click one button in the admin UI saying, I would like to switch over, and the module takes care of it, and as best as possible will try to take over all the settings that they had before so that they can just continue in the same way as they did before that. And I was amazed by that. Champagne was in the fridge, and we found a comment on Slack. There was somebody totally unknown to all of us, and he left kind of a sarcastic comment like, oh, that's news, kind of thing. And I thought, something is wrong here. So I pinged that person. That was Monday morning, 8 o'clock my time. And it turned out that guy was just about to leave the office because he lived in, or still lives in, New Zealand. It was late in the evening over there. And I said, can we get on a call because I would like to understand about your comment. It sounds like you are really frustrated. He said, yeah, let's go on a call. So he joined, and I explained what was going on. I said, what was the reason for your comment? And he said, you know what? I'm from an industrial company. We are end users of Drupal. And my manager tasked me 3 weeks ago that I can work on the maintenance of EU cookie compliance, and for the last 2 weeks I was working full-time on it to maintain it. Nobody knew. He spent his time. He was paid by his manager because he convinced his manager that this is necessary, which is a fantastic story from a contribution point of view, that a client is actually spending resource, and then it's me coming along and telling him, look, it's all throwaway ware, right? But when he heard about the story and why all that happened, he said, you know what, that makes so much sense. I have no hesitation going back to my manager, explaining what happened. I'm on board. I will join the Claro maintenance as well. And again, I got a goosebump. It was something, some of those experiences that I tend to believe is only possible in the Drupal community. But I also want to give a shout out to a guy called Jan Kellerman. He's the managing director of a Drupal agency, Work21, also based in Germany. And they are the maintainers of the Claro integration into Drupal. And he's doing a fantastic job. He was excited that his module got selected, and it felt like suddenly, without warning, he spent 2 months almost full time in responding to our requirements, and he has done it all. No payment, no commitment, just because he likes it. And I think that's the right time to also give a quick shout out to the team. There are 9 individuals from 6 different Drupal agencies coming from 6 different countries. There is Dropsolid, there is Lake Drops, Rumsalt, Toyo, Work21, and Acolono from Austria. Those who are organizing DrupalCon Vienna in October. So if you want to come, these are the guys doing that. So, default configuration for Drupal CMS. Now that we found a module that can do all that, we had to figure out what is the best configuration for the product that goes to marketeers. They want to have something that runs out of the box. And I think it's fair to say what we achieved is it just works. It's invisible and non-intrusive, which is kind of strange. I have to tell you an anecdote. Only last week, I had a client who opened an issue in the Claro issue queue saying, can we not bring back this banner that people have to click away because my manager is worried that we are probably not doing the right thing. Imagine that. We got it to a point where people are in a mood where they think those banners have to be there, otherwise something is broken. This is so crazy. And I really feel sorry for that we took it that far. What we've done for Drupal CMS is also, in a way, auto-configured. Like, if you add new services to your Drupal CMS site, Claro will recognize that and enable services that are required so that you remain compliant, enable themselves and come up with extra default configuration. The widgets are only showing up if really, really necessary. Otherwise, they stay behind the scenes. And we also provided an empty node, which is the privacy policy, something that is required kind of everywhere, more or less. But we did not try to come up with default content for the privacy policy, because that's just impossible, and it would create expectations that we can't fulfill. So it's an empty node, and everybody needs to fill it with the content that applies to them. And there are no third-party components when you install Drupal CMS. So even the fonts and JavaScript libraries, everything is served from the Drupal server. So that is one thing that is important for compliance as well. So here is a fresh Drupal CMS installation. There's no widget, there's no banner, and still everything is there. Now let's add a remote video. Like create a new media entity, select remote video, put in the URL of a YouTube video, for example. And after that, go back, and there is still no disturbing widget. But there is a new link in the footer. Well, I need to go to the other screen to do that. It's really there. It says My Privacy Settings. Well, you almost can't notice it. That's true, but that's on purpose. Why should you? You know, you're not interested in that primarily. You are interested in the content and the services of that website. So we don't want to get into your way while browsing a website. But if you click on that link, the widget that everybody is waiting for is now eventually, showing up. And it is very short in this case because it only contains the services that are relevant for the current state of this Drupal site. It has some required functions, like, for example, am I allowed to store your decision as a cookie in your browser? You have to accept that, otherwise you can't do anything else with it. And it has now an option that asks you to accept remote videos, yes or no. So if you go to that site that contains the video though, you won't, well, we are now in a state where the user has not yet given consent, right? So we see the thumbnail of the video, not the video itself, overlaid by a widget telling you what's going on. So we want the user to make an informed decision. So we have to tell them what's going on. And once they give consent, then Claro is actually loading the video itself, allowing the user to play the video. And the decision the user is making is about, I only accept that for this one instance, or for future instances as well. So this is what is then being stored in the browser settings and is relevant for the next time when they come along again. Now the site builder has decided to apply a few more recipes, like, for example, event and analytics. And for analytics, there is an extra challenge because they need the user's consent, because otherwise analytics can't do anything, right? And why do I install analytics if the likelihood that any user will give consent is kind of zero? I can just leave it out. Now, the analytics guys, they really would like to see an opt-out setting for analytics, but that is in most countries no longer allowed. It has to be opt-in. But on the other hand, I understand if somebody needs analytics, if that's a business requirement, we have to come halfway from both directions. And that's the reason why if you enable analytics on Drupal CMS, From that point on, we're going to get the widget in the bottom right. We are still trying to get out of your way so you can continue browsing the site, but we are showing it to ping the user, look, we want to actually track your journey on our site. Please give us consent and move on. And from that point on, once they have made their decision, if they want or not, that widget will disappear again. It will come back at a certain point. I go into that in a second, but that is the possibility on how that may work. Now, it may well be that lots of Drupal CMS company users will decide that's not how that can work for us. And we are not preventing anyone from going into the settings and change from opt-in into opt-out. It's technically possible. Whether this is compliant with what you need or want to do is up to the site owner. That's not our responsibility. We can explain what's going on, but we cannot and don't want to prevent people doing it differently. And after that, now that analytics is installed or applied, and events and many more services, that widget starts to grow. It's pretty big now because there are purposes, and underneath those purposes there are services. By default, if you open the widget, it's only the purposes that you see. That's 4 of them in this case. But you can open the groups, and then you see the individual services underneath each purpose. And the end user can give consent individually per service or grouped by purpose. That's completely down to them. Now let's look into mapping services, and that is very similar to what we saw with remote videos. Martin Anderson Clues had built the event recipe, and that contains location maps as well. And as maps are served by third-party services again, if we just load the map into the browser, we would expose the IP address, if not more, from that visitor to a third-party service, which allows them to build profiles, track the users, and so on and so forth, which is, again, not allowed without the consent. And that's why the map is not loading, but there is a widget, like with videos, and if the user clicks on that widget, it will load the map. And again, the user can give consent to load maps in the future as well without asking again. And Claro is really smart. Up to this point, we had the widget on the bottom right in a way like it doesn't appear in the first place. It only comes up because we had a kind of a compromise with the analytics requirements. But once the user has made their mind up and decided what they would want to allow and click Save, the widget disappears, and they can explicitly bring it back by clicking the link in the footer. But Claro recognizes if some configuration on the website has changed and a new service was added, which also requires consent, which the user wasn't able to give yet because it wasn't there when they visited the widget the last time. The widget comes back and explains why it comes back. It tells the user that there is a new service, you probably want to review your settings, and that's about it. If they save that new decision again, the widget will disappear until there is another reason to come back, but that will be very rare. And I think that's exactly what users want. They don't want to be disturbed. This is just something that should happen in the background. Now, last but not least, we have the AI chatbot. We are switching to the backend because this is by default only available to authenticated users. The chatbot is also taking your prompts, sending them to third parties. For the same reason, there is a widget blocking that. If you give consent, the bot expands its dialog box and you can use it as intended. But as I mentioned before, all the default settings from the privacy recipe that we developed can be changed at any time. The settings form is pretty comprehensive, but it's well organized and well documented. So most users should be able to find their way around it. And talking about documentation, that brings me to the next topic, which is, well, twofold. On the right, that's the old Drupal org branding, is the documentation for the Claro module. That comes from Jan Kellerman and his team. They have done a great job in documenting how it works, how to change the settings, and why each of the settings are there, what their meaning is, and lots of background information, links to external sources. This is just a great resource if you want to learn about privacy. The left one is brand new, and I would like to send a thank you to Amber Himes-Matz and Joe Schindler, both from Drupalize Me. They have done a fantastic job. They interviewed us as the team that made that all work and turned that into documentation explaining the user what it is, how to change it, and so on and so forth. And I'm so grateful that they have done it just in time for DrupalCon. This page was only published last week, Friday, so this is amazing. So what's next? Consent management is done. That's what we already saw. Then the next step we are already working on is data protection, and that will then be followed by ongoing audits. Data protection is about identifying sensitive data, step one. If we can't identify sensitive data, we can't protect it properly. Then we probably have to create reports. If a user is asking the website owner, can you tell me what data is stored about me? That is a growing requirement that more and more legislations are introducing. And then last but not least, the user could request the site owner to delete all their data. And we are currently, I mentioned the GDPR module before, that contains all of that already, but that's only about 20% of the whole feature set in GDPR. All the rest is not really for us. And we've spoken to the maintainers and they agreed that we extract that functionality which is proven and works and stick that into a brand new suite of modules which can be used just for that purpose. And then last but not least, ongoing audits. Again, it's a journey, not a destination. And that is, providing default setup out of the box is just not enough. Why? Well, sites and legislations are changing rapidly, as we saw. So we need to help during the life cycle of a Drupal site, and we will provide tools in Drupal CMS and other Drupal sites, of course, with audit tools that analyze the site and come up with potential issues and recommendations on how you should go about them, to find also help on how to fix them, which isn't always help from a developer. It can also be help from a legal advisor, like what do I have to put into my privacy statement on the site to actually tell the user the truth. So that's about it. Let's wrap up so that we still have a little bit of time for questions. So it's about fundamental rights and obligations, and it's, again, a journey. And consent management doesn't have to get into your way or the user's way. It is possible to satisfy both parties. And last but not least, data protection and audit will follow suit, I believe, later in 2025. So let's give you the overview about the links. On top, there is the shortcut to the slides again, and all the resources that I was referring to. And if you want to find me online, then go to the shortcut /Jürgen Haas. That's me, and that handle you can find on Slack, Drupal.org, and almost everywhere on the non-commercial social platforms. And now it's about time for questions. And before I go there, I would like to thank my sponsors as well, and I can only do all that work with their help. And if you want to help me do more like that, then you are invited to go to my sponsor link. I thank you so much for your interest and attention, and I would like to open it up and answer all your questions now. Thank you.
Question. You mentioned there was a paid version of Claro. Is that an extension,
very good question. It's the exact very same piece of software, and the service they provide is that they set it up, configure it for you, and provide some monitoring service to see how people are getting along with your website. That's all they do. So for a normal Drupal website, it is not required. It's probably a nice to have. But the piece of software that's being used is 100% the same. Yep.
This is fantastic. Could I implement this on an existing Drupal 10 site?
Yes, you can. The question was, can I use that on a regular Drupal site? Yes, you can. Composer require Drupal/Drupal_CMS_privacy_basic. I hope I got that right. Yep.
I think the last I heard, TakeKit was a concern for GDPR, like Adobe's font service.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really host locally. That's something I think they often include in Twig template or something. Is Claro smart enough to know about that stuff, or is there like a hook that we provided, another option?
The way Claro handles unknown services, until we tell it that there are fonts like that, we can set up an explicit service just for that. But Claro has a setting that says log or track or monitor unknown services. That means whenever there is a page delivered by your Drupal site which contains external resources that Claro doesn't know about, it creates a log entry in Watchdog. And then you can go back and look into that and find out, oh, there is something I need to deal with. And then you can set up either your own service on your own Drupal site by creating some regular expressions that tell Claro what to look for and how to handle it. Or you can open an issue in the Claro issue queue, and then we can make that a general service available for other Drupal sites as well.
Did you say Claro's maintenance module, or a group of independent developers are just tracking changes from Claro to update?
Yeah, good question. The question was, who is maintaining Claro? Is it an external party, or is it some Drupal folks on Drupal.org? The answer is twofold. There is an external library which is maintained by other group of people. We are in touch with them. They have been a bit slow recently in maintenance, which is because they have been very busy with some commercial contracts. But I only received a message from them on Friday that they are now back on track and will continue maintaining that. And then there is a separate group, which are Drupal people. They are maintaining a module which is just there for integrating that external thing into Drupal and providing the settings form and so on and so forth. Yep.
We have clients who add things via tag manager. You just never know that they're going to go and do that. Is there anything that would Claro be aware of that because it's embedded in tag manager essentially when that script comes?
That is covered by tracking unknown services as well, so it can't fix it automatically. Maybe we should introduce it to AI, then it may well be. But for now, it just makes you aware of a potential issue that you want to look into yourself. That's how it works. Well, the question was Google Tag Manager is sometimes adding stuff which you don't know before. How does Claro handle that?
Is it the same if it's a remarketing pixel? If it's inserted in a block, for example, Claro will detect that as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But all of those questions should be a reminder to us if we are selling, and I assume we have end users here, but we also have service providers. If we propose that solution to clients, we should not position it as a solution that makes your client compliant. It's a tool to help them to become compliant and to stay compliant, but never promise them that, tick that box and all is fine. The responsibility is with the site owner. right? That's very important. More questions? Okay.
I have one more.
Okay.
Not that I agree with this, but I'm trying to think. Some clients like cookie lock now is an option for competitor to Claro, and they kind of might look at your IP and say, oh, they're from California, let them opt in or opt out, or if they're from Europe, let them do the opposite.
Mhm.
So it gives you a different option depending on what region you're from. I'd rather protect users' privacy at the end, but is there a way with Claro to say if somebody's coming from one region or another do different things?
I would hope that we will be able to do so in the future. The question is, couldn't Claro just know where the visitor is coming from and what setup would be applicable to them? It would be nice to be able to do that. We would have to translate IP address to location and then do some mapping for location to setting. That's hard to maintain, to be honest, if we do it for everyone. Bearing in mind that things are changing all the time, and I wouldn't do the location tracking in Claro. I would try to integrate that with some service that provides that already. What's required on top of that, and I'm currently in discussion with the leadership team about that, I would love to see that the installer of Drupal CMS asks for the location of the host of the website. Because if we know that, we could provide some recipes which are location-based. Like, for example, in Europe, we have additional requirements. We don't just need a privacy statement. We also need an imprint and a few other required data points that a site must have. We decided not to put that into Drupal CMS because that would confuse everybody outside of Europe. What's that? What's an imprint? You know, that was the reaction inside of our team. But if we know where the server is hosted, we could then provide location-based sub-recipes, if you like. But I wouldn't hold my breath for that, because not only it's not in Drupal CMS yet, but also there won't be much in it, because I don't think we want to raise expectation that we provide 200 different flavors of setup. All right, looks like that's about it. I'm around today and tomorrow. Ping me whenever you need something. Happy to help. Thanks again.